I'm going through these comments, and I've gone through quite a few of them, and I still have one more. I want to do one more set of comments because you guys and gals, you're coming up with lots of good reference points, and this is really helping the narrative. It's helping us also understand what I've been saying, and you say it in a different way than I do it, and so that's why it's good to get it from you and to hear you speak. So let's go ahead with Ngata Tan. Ngata Tan, you've been saying quite a few things in many of my videos, and I thank you for that. But this is what you say. The problem with specialists such as Damien Salgado, the numismatist, he calls himself, and David King, the mathematics historian, is that they can't tell the woods for the trees anymore, or the forest for the trees. It's probably the word he was looking for. Numismatics and mathematics history become their worldview to their reality. The fact of the matter is that history encompasses more than numismatics and the evolution and development of mathematics. Science merely offers the best explanation of a phenomena based on the best available evidence at that point in time. When further evidence emerges from scientific or historic discoveries, in the case of numismatics or mathematic history, then conclusions change. Isn't this the pathway to uncovering truth in the natural world of man? And what he is saying is Salgado and King. Now he's talking about Dr. David King, who has written a very scathing article against Dan Gibson. Al-Fadi and I are just about ready to release a whole series of videos where we have gone through every one of those challenges that King throws at Dan Gibson, and we take and Gibson has responded to all of them. Gibson has done a great job. Go up to Dan Gibson's site, go onto his YouTube site, but he has gone to every one of these challenges and has answered them. And so what we have done is we've taken those answers and we embellished them and worked on them, and when we've also gone and given our own answers to them. Because what King does, and also in some ways Damien is doing this, is that they have this narrative that they don't want to let go of. In the case of Dr. King, what has happened is he is the world authority on the Qiblas, and so therefore he has spent all his, he's 79 years old, almost reaching his 80s, and he still does teach a bit, but he is almost in retirement. He's at the end of his career, and here comes a whippersnapper, Dan Gibson, and just destroys everything that he has worked for, everything that he has taught, all the books that he has written. Dan Gibson just destroys it with one simple process, and that is he goes physically to these mosques and looks at these Qiblas, these extant Qiblas that are still there, and shows that King comes up with the wrong conclusions. Yes, these Qiblas are not facing Mecca. King agreed on that, but what he wasn't prepared for was that Gibson found out why. And Gibson found out that the reason that they're not facing Mecca, well, there were 4 reasons, and there were 4 different directions. We're going to be going into that, and you've already heard me and Al-Fadi talk about it. And because of that, he was able to find that in every case of those 4 different directions, they all followed what was happening politically. It all has to do with the politics of the era. Why didn't King learn this? Why didn't King do this? Well, for one very simple reason. Dr. David King only went to one mosque. You cannot build a whole career based on one mosque, physically going there. And he only really talked about 3 different mosques from 3 different cities, and you cannot do that without actually looking. And then he spent his whole time using the 9th, 10th, and 11th century scholars to say what they thought was happening in the 7th and 8th century. You don't do that. You don't go to 9th, 10th, and 11th century scholars who themselves are curious, who themselves don't have an answer, and just quote them just because they're Arabs. You go back and you look and you ask, and you see what was happening in the 7th century and in the 8th century. You don't go with people that are living hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years later to get the answer. You go to the actual time place. You go to what was actually happening on the ground. And that was King's problem. Damien, in some ways, is doing the same problem, the same mistake. And this is what Ngata Tan is saying. Be careful. When you go and look at history, make sure that you go to the historical period that you're referring to. Get there. Go there. Look at the extant material. There is lots of, Dan Gibson found over 100 mosques. He went to over 100 mosques, not just one mosque like David King. He went to over 100 mosques, and he actually physically went there, and he measured the Qibla walls, which are very easy to find because they're the longest walls. And he measured where they were directed using the most modern technology that we use today, Aster satellites. Why didn't David King do this? Why? He had his whole career, he could have done this. He could have even done it with just one Qibla. He didn't even do that. He spent his whole time staying in libraries, reading books from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century without ever physically going and asking the questions he should have asked, which Dan Gibson asked. Damien is doing much the same thing. He is so stuck on the classical narrative, which comes from 9th and 10th century. Again, the same problem. They come from people like Ibn Hisham in 833, and also Waqidi in 835, and also Al-Bukhari in 870, and Sahih Muslim in 875, and Al-Tabari in 923. These are 9th and 10th century scholars redacting back what they believed happened in the 7th century, and you can't do that. You can't redact back what was happening 200 years earlier unless you're back there. And that's why you need to look at these coins. These coins are back there. These coins are from that time period. They are written. They have writing on them. They have images on them. They have reference to religious icons on them. And that's why they are so important for us, because now we finally have material from that period. The same way that Dan did with the Qiblas, we're doing with the coins. And it's the same problem, and that's why Ngata Tan is coming up with this. Very good. Thanks, Ngata. You get it. You got it. I hope all the rest of you are getting it. Make sure that whenever you make a reference point or you're talking about a certain time period, that you go to that time period. No, we can't go back to the 7th century, but you can go to artifacts from that time period. The coins are from that time period. The coins were being minted by Arabs. They have Arabic writings on them. They have the reference. Muawiyah has his name on it. He's the first of the Umayyad Caliphates from 661. 663, 667, and then of course you have Abd al-Malik, who then introduces his coin in 692, and then introduces his image on it the next year, and then finally takes his image off and replaces it with Arabic script, with the Shahada that we've been looking for. That is the true Islamic coin, and that's 696. Listen, thank you, Ngata. That's true. Specialists many times cannot see the forest for the trees. I think that was the difficult with Damien Salgado. He is a numismatic expert. He just does not understand that coins by themselves, you can't just look at the coins on themselves unless you understand what was happening when that coin was minted. You need to look at the political situation. In the same token, we're doing that with the coins. So did Dan Gibson do that with the Qiblas. He looked at what was happening politically. He looked at what was happening historically. He looked at what was going on there between the Byzantines and also between the Romans and also between the Sassanids. And he also was looking and seeing what was happening between the two great empires, the Umayyad Empire and the Abbasid Empire. The Umayyad Empire that was headquartered way up in Damascus, and the Abbasid Empire that was headquartered way over there in Baghdad. And he was showing you how, if you look at the political situation, if you look and see the timeline and watch the history, you can then see why the Qiblas change. That's all we ask people to do. Please, for heaven's sakes, don't take what people 200 to 300 years later said. Go and ask what the people at that time were saying, what was happening to them. And they were talking on coins, on mosques, on architectural structures. They just weren't writing it down in documents, unfortunately. So we go where the evidence leads us, and the evidence is leading us to an environment that was not Islamic, at least not until Abd al-Malik introduces it. God bless you. This is Jay on this beautiful lake. You can't see it over there. There's a beautiful heron who's listening to what I'm saying. He's enjoying everything I'm saying. I'm sure he understands it. Just over here to my right. Okay, this is Jay. Over and out.